Did Gene show up? Blackstone? A certain mystic, Blackstone. A certain mystic once looked over all of the past descriptions regarding the effort to reach that advanced stage of awareness and decided he'd name his approach the do-nothing way. But then thought, nah, that'd be even more misunderstood than the other ones. He did later think about naming it the let-go method, but even that one should read the constantly letting go. He finally concluded that they're just not making names the way they used to, or else that something new had happened to him. As distinguished from other earthly creatures, man is potentially individualistic through consciousness, but then limited by thought. Consciousness, the sky; thought, clouds; and the intellect needs rain. A few find the flood level reached sooner than others. The music of the quest: silent nights, vocal sages. Silent nights, vocal sages. The name of the theme once was Silent Nights, Vocal Sages. So what is it now? No song stays forever at the top of the charts. The parade's grand marshal announced, the time for talk has passed, but fear not, it shall return, only to leave us again. If those who began to understand the physical, neural nature of what this kind of activity is actually all about were to conjure up a picture of some evil force, it would most likely resemble glue of some sort. While thought is food for the mind, it is not necessarily so for consciousness. One of the major mystical truths of the minor variety. When the would-be awakened lose their way or their energy, they tend to then write their biography detailing how they achieved their success. In his attempts to analyze things going on in life, one man would remind himself not to use examples from real life. A man who had become well-traveled in the consciousness quest began to see a certain question he had had earlier in his journey, now apparently turned inside out, which was, where am I when I am not home? When I am not consciously here, what is it that I think about that keeps me sufficiently occupied and unaware of my unawareness? To oppose things is to ultimately accept things as they appear to be. Morality is to behavior modification as enlightenment is to Tefloning the mind. Unrecognized metaphors can live even amongst the best of planned metaphorical families. And another of the major mystical truths, this time regarding the discovery. You do not find answers to your questions, but you do find how irrelevant are the questions. In the work on consciousness, the method of methods is not to do something about it, but to do nothing about it. How men remain satisfied to ride buses when planes are available is due in part to them believing they hear unending announcements of upcoming flight departures. Instead of books, one man collected reviews of books. And rather than be aware of what was going on, he thought about it.
No.
Men are all parts of one collective whole. Ordinary minds believe that they are singularities amidst a polarity, but they are not. While the more conscious may be, but think it not. Another difference for you. Those who didn't make it to the final destination erect where they stopped monuments and schools. When consciousness is being dragged away by thought, even for a moment, everything else is moot. One potential danger, or for some, potential pleasure, in undertaking a mystical discipline is that you can begin to live for the discipline rather than live for yourself, which actually requires some mystical disciplined effort. Since everyone is trying to become more conscious, the only difference between a mystic and everyone else is that he knows it. This can be most useful to remember. While it's been said that the truth is everywhere and that the Buddha nature is in all things, the deeper understanding is that all thoughts are equal, and for increased consciousness, equally useless. The concerns of ordinary people are what keeps them ordinary. To keep the flow of consciousness free, grease the hinge on the door of thought. The awakened, when clumsy, offend the dead. Heroes in truth survive in silence. Last time I happened to mention that perhaps one of the least understood apparent mystical allegories, or even taken sometimes as literal history, is the story of all of these traditional mystical teachers striking some would-be follower, some student, someone who comes with a question, and for an answer they get hit, or they get hit for failing to follow some appointed task, etc. And I pointed out that that makes interesting reading and can make fodder for certain kinds of dreams, but it was more applicable to the internal operations of one person and how they might handle unruly, strike unruly thought. Make it simple, strike all metaphors henceforth until further notice. Even should I slip off the shoulder of the road and forgetfully add same here and there, ignore them. You have your carte blanche in advance. Other than that one from last time, I was going to point out that the most misunderstood notion amidst all that's considered to be secret, traditional, mystical, etc., would be this. And there are several versions, as always. There's one within Sufism, there's certainly one within Zen, and in all religions and all would-be mystical aspects of said religions. But perhaps the better known one of them all, or the best known, would be the Zen, wherein somebody described it, and it's still repeated, that compared to the actual standard practice of Buddhism, that Zen was a teaching outside the scripture. Sufism has a version of truth beyond doctrine, but the Zen one back covers it. Teaching outside the scripture being the orthodox belief of, in this case, Buddhism, but it doesn't matter. This, similar to the idea of mystical teachers hitting students, this idea lends itself immediately to inclinations already wired into the human nervous system. The obvious one being the belief that there is, or possibly is, some secret knowledge on this planet. It has been here. It's in Jewish mysticism. It is in many of the old pagan, the Greek, the Egyptian mysteries, but some of the pagans, I guess we'd call them religions after the fact. But the idea of, it's where some of the first ideas, or perhaps the original ideas of ordinary people, of a divinely touched shaman of some kind. And then it leads into direct descendants of God's ideas that Jesus was an actual physical manifestation, a worldly manifestation of the creation force itself. All of this lends itself, and it leads back to the fact, the suspicion, the belief, and some people's absolute conviction that there's been some sort of secret knowledge. And it could even be looked at, if you want to take it in a somewhat more scientific vein, that rather than looking just with technology, cosmologists through technology back through time, studying the universe and trying to increase the technology to such a point that they can literally see back in time via looking back in space, and perhaps see at least a second after the birth of this universe. There's another way to look at it that is not mystical, occult, or hocus-pocusy at all, and that would be the possibility that I have yet to hear biology come up with, or that in that same sense, a more direct approach would be if they knew how, if they had the kind of, quote, technology, unquote, to look back in the human genetic scheme, that you do not have to look out in the universe, you understand, instead of having a telescope. Right quick, imagine a genetoscope. There, I know there is no such thing, but that you could suddenly turn on yourself, or on somebody else. Makes it sound more scientific, that we could take somebody, that we could take some other human and open them up, and in some way, or take out just perhaps a small cell specimen, that we had this genetic scope, and you could look into it, and it would be the same as what they're attempting to do, is physically look back into the depths of space, and hence into time, and to see, at least right up to the threshold of the birth of the universe. Mm-hmm. You could see the birth of man, because it's still got to be there in the same way that the radiation background, by one definition, just using their descriptions, is still the holdovers, and if we could unravel it and look back far enough to where that started, we would understand or have some sort of picture, either audio or verbal, of the explosion, the birth of the universe, and then what's all taken place if we simply look backwards. You could do the same thing in the human nervous system, genetically. That would be the secret knowledge. But the idea that there has been a secret knowledge that has been passed down, what I wanted to point out, that as strange as it can sound to strictly intellectual people, that would say, well, that whole idea of some sort of secret knowledge is just the extreme of beliefs in conspiracy, or it's religion taken to even a more unbelievable extreme than is normally practiced. Yeah, and I know, I can say the same thing, that those who normally, or those who verbally, publicly speak of it, do not know what they're speaking about. But to dismiss the idea that there could be knowledge, that there could be somebody staying around today, whether it was today now, or whether it was today 1,000 years ago, that knew something about the nature of the origins of life. To dismiss that and say, well, because ordinarily, if someone says that publicly, it's just one step to them then saying, well, yes, because I am in direct communication with God. I have His unlisted number, or I am God, or I found a book that God wrote and lost, that sort of thing. And so you can immediately dismiss it as soon as if they say, well, if somebody says, I have some idea, or I know the history of man, the real history, in other words, the secret of life, the purpose of life. You're just waiting. It won't take but a second for the person then to fall into one of, because God told me. And then you can dismiss it. But to dismiss it and not consider the fact, not just of some individual somewhere, but that information is within you, for someone to dismiss that is strictly unscientific, because they would be the same ones who would lend their verbal or theoretical support to what little they may know about the idea of tracing back the cosmic radiation, looking back into the spatial depths of space and finally to see the beginning of the universe itself. It's the same thing. It's just not taken into account. So it's not just that there has to be a specific individual somewhere that's been touched by the muses, although that may be, but it's not touched by the muses. We're just talking about little things that pop up on the genetic screen, little blips here and there. You can look at them as anomalies. Mm-hmm. But you could say that the information is in you in the same way that if indeed the background radiation contains the way to unravel the physical history of this universe, then it's out there, and for a person to stand and say, well, I don't understand it, all you're saying is that you do not have the technology. They've got the technology down at whatever the space station is in Puerto Rico or somewhere else where they've got the technology, they can be doing it. And you can say, well, yeah, but I don't have the technology. And I could say, yes, but you can't dismiss it then. I mean, the background radiation's there just because you can't hear it, because you don't have access to the equipment. Or the heavens are there, space is there, the whole universe, just because you don't have access to Mount Palomar or the Hubble telescope to look back. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, does it? And a reasonable mind nowadays would say certainly not. And I could say, well, in the human genetic nervous system, you are a piece of whoever Adam was. In the same way that you are a piece of whatever the stars are, you're a piece of whatever gave birth to the universe itself physically, and people go, oh yeah. Then you genetically are still a piece of whoever the first human was. Because people will immediately admit nowadays, I mean, when I say admit, they will proclaim the fact that, yes, we're all part of the universe because we are part, the makeup of our atomic structure is the same thing that makes up the stars. And so we're a piece of the universe. We are a piece of history. But if you try to say something about, and that, if you try to take it down to strictly personal, a human level, and say, well, you are also a piece of the history of whatever man is. It's imprinted in you. I guess nowadays you might get some people to theoretically go, well, yeah, maybe theoretically. It's no theoretical. It's no more theoretical than it is them looking into space, attempting to look back, which is an accepted scientific fact that you can do it. It's just that we're lacking the technology. You can do it genetically. The only technology lacking is what? Does not come off of a shelf. Cannot get a government grant. Just all sorts of things you can't do about it or with it. But back to where we started. The idea that there is a secret. There is. And the secret is right out. It's in the open. It's just as big as the universe. There is no difference. It completely dispels. It's safe saying that because those who want to believe in the kind of public marketplace, New Age, mysticism, etc., if they hear what I just said, then they dismiss it because it takes all the air out of it. It takes the fun out, and they don't want to hear it any further. So we can dismiss them to start with. But then ordinary scientific, ordinary sane, reasonable people who never think about such as this, for them to dismiss it, they miss the whole point. Because if there is a secret, whatever the history of man is, the history is as close and as out in the open as are the heavens, space itself. And everybody knows it's there. That you take a regular, middle-of-the-road, scientific, reasonable, sane mind today, as well-read as you and I are, which matters scientific, and talk about they're looking back into space and they're in fact claiming every month, it seems, that yes, we are now so close to the actual edge of space itself, which translates into the moments before the Big Bang. We're so close now that it's just a matter, it's not if we're going to ever see it, it's just a matter of when. And they'll go, yes, oh yes, I know that. And I can say, well, there it is, how come you didn't do it? And their story is, well, I don't have the technology. I don't have access to telescopes. I didn't have the training. Now I say, but what they're seeing, what they're discovering is right up there, right? It's free. I mean, it's out there. When you squint your eyes, can you see the edge of the universe? And of course we all laugh. Well, no. But it's there, right? I mean, they're not magicians working those telescopes. Oh, certainly not. They just got better technology. But then if you try to say, well, you can look back to the edge of the birth of man, you can see the history of man, which is, in essence, the answer to the question, what's the purpose of life? assuming it has a purpose. If you knew the history of man, then you'd know the purpose. So the secret you would know. And then they go, oh, no. Mm-hmm. Huh. And of course the other branch of humanity, as I said, the ones that believe, well, it is a secret, but it's just being held by a few people, or there's some reason, or life itself, or they would say the gods of some sort. They select certain people, let it be known. It is as obvious and out in the open as space. But there is a fair parallel, as when I went through all that, is if an ordinary person even went along that far and said, all right, but in that case, why can't I see it? And then I would tell them, you lack the proper technology. No. They wouldn't like that at all. Back to where we started. Which that was way off the point, but so what? It's not like we're going somewhere. No. Well, every time we do these tapings, it is like we're going somewhere. We're going until that clock runs down. It runs out, and the tape's out, and that's the end of the 55 or 58 minutes, whatever it is. You can say, yes, we're going somewhere. Run the clock down. The idea of a teaching outside the Scriptures that has always been around, and there's a wide spectrum of where it exists, all the way obviously to the totally unprofitable fringe areas where people believe that there is a specific secret and for some reason it's being held back, or there's a group of greedy people or whatever. But all the way from that to the fairly mainstream of religion. For instance, the Catholic Church being one of the larger, more conservative religions in the world today, they admit they don't talk about it anymore. Not that they're hiding it, people have just lost interest. But the whole point of the succession of the popes, it started out somewhat specifically, and it had to go allegorically, and now they have to kind of wrestle back and forth, I guess. But the idea that Jesus transferred some secret to people, to somebody, to Peter. You know, he told, or maybe the disciples all together, he gave them all little pieces, whatever the story, but that there has been a succession of some sort of secret. At the more simplistic level, it comes out as physical ritual, like the Eucharist services that Catholicism, all of them do, is partaking ritualistically and allegorically, drinking the wine, eating the bread, and whatever they translate from the New Testament of whenever you do this, think ye of me, that you're eating my flesh and drinking my blood, which is to say, you're partaking of the secret that I knew. But ordinary people, all they want is the ritual and somebody to assure them that you were doing the right thing. But what I was getting at was even within the theorist of the Catholic Church, for instance, would be no secret, and if you asked them today, you would still, I'm sure, have people would say, well, yes, it seems as though there has to be some reality to the idea of the succession of the popes, that it can't be just a political office, even though they admit we get down, we vote, but we're in some way being led by the Spirit of truth, by the Spirit of God, and whoever's selected, there is some sort of information being passed down. It's hard to explain, because if you ask a pope right now, and he was still just with his ordinary wits and wasn't senile, and you said, do you actually know the secret of life? He'd go, well, no. I mean, he would admit it. And yet, there has to linger the idea that he is more than an elected official amongst a bunch of papal bureaucrats. And if not, back to the other idea that originally the founders of all religion, that, you know, Muhammad told his son or his daughter, and Buddha told the 12 monks that he had, that he told them, all right, I've seen it, or here it is, I always knew it, whatever it was, and here it is. And it's up to you guys, kind of PR it, water it down. You're in charge. I've now told you. I did my bit. I told you what the secret was. Now you take it from here and kind of spread it out, and kind of a franchise, you know, spread it out. That is always the Scripture. I mean, the spreading it out becomes the Scripture. It becomes the dogma, not with any negative connotation, but it becomes the accepted truth. If we were in a Buddhist country, or in the Buddhist area that took Buddhism now as a religion. And we took this Zen story that there is something else, that the practice of Zen, that Buddhism, wherever we were, that in some locale, that Buddhism was the conservative orthodox religion. And then out there outside of town, there's a Zen monastery. There's a group of guys that no big secret, and they call themselves Zen. And I could be using Islam and Sufism. I could make up something. It'd all be the same thing. And the Zen, people who were calling themselves followers of Zen, of a different sort of teaching, they would say that was not in conflict with Buddhism, but they would say it is something beyond the ordinary practice of Buddhism. There's no great secret, and any of you that don't be upset there in town, any of you who want to, come join us. Because what it is a teaching or a knowledge outside the doctrine. There are other ways to put it. You can put it's a practice outside the doctrine, but let's stick with intellectual matters to begin with. They can say, which they have, that it's a teaching outside the Scriptures. Only 30 minutes, we got to that point. At any rate, I guess I could have assumed that all of you had heard that in various forms. It strikes everyone who has the least bit of interest in trying to understand the nature of life. So go back to the scenario right very briefly I've done several times. If you have attempted to figure out life, then everyone, no matter where they are, goes through basically the same steps. That you normally at first turn to your parents, then you turn to whatever your parents' religious structure is, and then you perhaps turn to, if you can find any thinkers, local thinkers, or you may turn to books on philosophy, then books on the occult, books on the mystical. And there seems to be a kind of scripture, a kind of doctrine, a kind of local belief that people say, well, this is it. If you're going to live a decent life, if there's any chance that you'll become a better person, you've got to follow this, whatever it is, Buddhism, Judaism, whatever it is. And then you hear that there is a teaching outside the Scripture. Then you think, well, that's it. That's what I want. But then if it's outside the Scripture, that means it is not dogmatized, it is not formalized, and so you're faced with, once you discover the difficulty in locating this, at least you have immediately a partial answer to it. That it's outside the Scripture, and therefore it's not going to be easy to find. I started out pointing out that this was perhaps the most misunderstood idea in the world. But it could be used as the slogan. It could be used as the advertising, the center of all advertising campaigns for every form of mysticism that ever lived. Because I was not, as you know, limiting it by any means to Zen or Sufism or anything. But the idea, if suddenly we said we have this new mystical system, that we're going to present one and we'll call it the XYZ system. And it would fit right now if I said, now, the XYZ system, or the A to Z system, how about that? Yeah. And I said, just continue this made-up example, and I said, this is taking into consideration every mystical system, every school, every conceived ritualistic, methodical approach that's ever been done, from publicly known religions to apparently secret societies and efforts. Let's call all of that up until now the A to Z. What I'm calling this the A to Z system, or the A to Z plus system. Because what it is, what I know, what I'm here to present, is a teaching, ideas outside all the known Scriptures, not just limited to any one. So therefore it is a truth, a teaching outside the Scriptures. That would be the rallying cry, could have been the slogan for every mystical system, every would-be mystical system that has ever come down the old interstate, or any that will come, because it fits. And as soon as you hear it, it's not that you are slack of mind. As soon as you hear that, you go, yes, well, it's got to be true. And then once you hear that, and that you have the perceptive wherewithal not to get identified with any particular religion, you just hear that the truth, the secret, the great work, whatever it is, the enlightenment, the illumination, the awakening, all can only come from some sort of knowledge, ideas outside these Scriptures. It's Scriptures in small s, so that it applies no matter where you are. And everybody goes, yeah, 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 yeah. Now into the misunderstoodness. Instead of it being in reference to actual information, ideas, and their external position to the codified, formalized Scriptures of wherever and whenever you are. Other than that, the misunderstoodness I present to you is that whatever ideas you have are the Scriptures. Whatever thoughts you're normally having, that's the Scriptures. Your thoughts. Don't look around. Don't look down and think, wait a minute, do I have Buddhist thoughts? Do I have heathen thoughts? Don't look anywhere. There are no conditions. There are no modifiers available. Even I will not run off the road here to ease your feelings. There are no modifiers. There are no conditions. Everything you think, every thought you have is the Scriptures. Therefore, the teaching is outside the Scripture. There is the secret. Anything your mind asks either me or yourself, or comments after I said that, is, as us mystics like to say, unadulterated. Can you say bullshit on television? I'm sorry, horse shit. Or for those of you that prefer smaller beasts, duck shit. Which, come to think about it, those of you with any farm experience, is more exemplary of what I'm referring to. And those of you not from more rural areas, if you have any doubt, someday pick up a large duck and hold it in your lap and pet it for a few minutes. Or frighten it, tell it a scary story, and you'll have some idea of what I mean, as opposed to walking through large pastures and kicking at cow patties. There's a difference. But consider, people have lived their whole lives based upon the absolute conviction when they hear that there is a teaching outside the Scripture, whether they hear it applied to Zen, Sufism, or if they just hear the idea, and even if they can't seem to locate it, they operate on the basis that yes, there is no doubt. And that is not just an individual phenomenon. It has survived now for thousands of years. A teaching outside the Scriptures. And after that, they go to great pains, the apologists, to describe that they are not, let's say a Zen, back to that for a second, for the example, that they are not attacking Buddhism, the Buddhism, that it is a quite perfectly profitable, beneficial practice by all who wish it. But if any of you people here in our kind village or in this land, anybody in the hearing of my voice, if you would care for more than this, dear Buddha told us more than this. There is information outside these Scriptures. There's nothing wrong with the Scriptures, and what we're involved with does not in any way diminish the Scriptures, does not conflict with the Scriptures. Remember, by Scriptures, I'm talking about orthodox belief, the common belief even in the mystical reality of the time, which would normally be referred to as the religion of the time. It says it's not in conflict, it is simply outside it. But consider that thought is the Scripture. Your thought, not their thought, not the community thought, not that you're not tied to it, not that it's not part of you, but screw all that. That's not going to help you. Whatever you think is the Scripture. The secret work is some kind of knowledge outside the Scripture. That's simple. I mean, the sense itself is logical. It's just your mind goes, no. What? Hello, wait a minute. No. It is outside the Scripture. You see why this is, you've never heard that kind of description, because, well, when you get to this level, it always leaves you with, if we're going to keep the mind going, with two possibilities. That if you can pursue that, it has narrowed down all of the universe into one rat hole, or into one sentence, one idea, one spot. Out of the whole universe, we've got one spot. It's either that, or you have taken what you considered to be one spot that you kept thinking about, and it has now turned that one spot in to infinity. So it either has taken everything that you ever thought, if you can do it yourself, everything you ever thought, which means everything that man has thought, and it has now taken it down to this one thing. Or if you thought you had about had it down already to one thing, like you knew the secret, that you just about got it. Or maybe you even thought you had. If you can hear and follow what I just said, then if you don't like the first version, then it takes that one thing and now turns it into everything. We had a good example came up. Not of this, it has nothing to do with this. Just something occurred. Someone who had been considered himself decent and trying to do the right thing in life happened to get attacked. They were robbed, beat up, and that sort of thing, generally misused. And the person noted they had two primary questions they seemed that they kind of presented to the nature of life and if any possibility of any understanding, wherever they directed the question. But it was like two basic questions like, what were people thinking about to do that to me? I was absolutely innocent. That is just like somebody walking down the street and thugs jumped out of an alley, harmed you physically, stole everything you had. And the question was, what were they thinking to do that in this day and time? And the other question was, and I take it in a very wide sense, and the other question was, it's driving me crazy, I can't shake it, how can I forget it, how can I get over it? Take this first question and get beyond the idea of morality. It's got nothing to do with morality. It's got something to do, I can use my own terms the way I've been using civilization, because it has to do with whether someone, or to what degree someone is being driven by electrical, chemical, electrical activity higher above the ordinary level of consciousness that separates men from being non-men, or simply being non-neural Homo sapiens, to them thinking less, being less driven, more driven by the out-of-date, the increasingly out-of-date, the more feral survival instincts in man, which are quite proper in their place. So consider now we have, don't try and think up some example or why, picture, just picture that was an ordinary decent person, even somebody, just an ordinary decent person, and they just jumped. Civilized, the kind of person who would never do that to anyone else. A safe, civilized, sane person, and now they're clear. They are jumped, physically harmed, robbed, just mistreated. And then they ask, what could those people be thinking? Now, take the position that someone, just take my description, someone, they would never do it. Just never. And it's nothing to do with morality. We're not talking about morality. And the world's full of people like this. You don't have to be moral. You don't have to be religious in any particular way. That a person who would, if they found money, would return it. That sort of thing. Just honest, as far as a human can be honest, under most general conditions. And they are jumped and mistreated, physically harmed and robbed. And they ask, and it's a fair question. Listen to it. And they say, what could those people be thinking? It was right here in downtown Paris or London, in the heart of the civilized world. They had on clothes. I heard them speak. They could speak. They were literate. They could have passed on the street, and they jumped me and did this. What were they thinking? Compared to the person who asked the question, the answer is they were not thinking, which is why the question could never be answered. Now, that's an old one in the Western world. You can take it all the way from Job, and even before that, but Job, people normally refer to that. How can all these horrible things happen to such a decent person as Job? And if you take it out of the religious sense, it was a curse of God. We're asking now, how could other humans, how could somebody do this to me? What could they be thinking? Because if you are, we'll assume you listening to this, that you are a sane, civilized person who would not do such a thing. You can't even consider the circumstances in which you would rob somebody else unless it's maybe life or death. Anyway, you can't picture it. You cannot think of conditions under which you would do that. And therefore, here are other humans under the same general conditions where you live that did it to you, and the question is, what could they be thinking? Which is the old question of Job, how could this happen to me? But now you're asking, instead of attributing to gods or evil forces, you're asking more on a street level, speaking allegorically, of human, the intercourse between humans and everyone wired into the same kind of genetic neural network, you think, or you normally suppose, but now the question is, what could they be thinking? You know, what were they thinking when they did this? And the answer is, compared to the person asking it, they were not thinking. It is not absolute, of course, but now we should really refer to it as those who think more and those who think less. By keeping in mind, when we say think, we're not talking about any degrees, no reference to the degree of education or their IQ. It is whether they are being motivated, and the mind is only operating at a minimal level. It is operating, if energy is flowing, as I pointed out to you, that makes them human enough to even speak. It is flowing. But insofar, which people still do this, it's an old story, but they continue to do this. Now it's fallen into the world of jurisprudence and psychology, as they will question some man who hijacked a car and killed a woman and 3 kids and drove off in the car, and 2 blocks later wrecked it and got out and walked away. And they catch him. And it's something horrible, I just made up, but something horrible, and they try to talk to him, and it constantly comes out that the person not only does not show any remorse, which is bad enough, that'll make the news, and everybody wrings their hands, all civilized people, and it gives a little shiver. But and you'll see psychologists, sociologists, political commentators will sit around and have debates and discussions about how could we possibly stop this? How can we make, what is it that we're not doing in society that will allow somebody to look at a car and think, well, I'll hijack that car. I'll just go over there and tell them to get out of the car, and if they give me in trouble, I'll shoot them. Or maybe I'll just shoot them anyway, and it'll save me from having to talk about it. The ordinary people discussing this, they go, how can we get to their minds? It's like they don't even think about the consequences. They're going to get caught. I mean, it's stupid. And they don't know what to do with it. And it just goes off into into areas of less and less direct consequences it's supposed to, about, well, what we should do is, redistribute wealth, increase education. And it's nothing new, but they don't know what to do because there is no answer to it. They don't even have the right question. But what they're saying is, how can we, or they'll even question people who's done something like rob a bank. We just walk in and walk right in the hands of the police. And they just shot several people. And they finally catch them, they get to court, and somebody interviews them, or after they've been convicted, and they say, we looked at this case, and you actually walked into a place, and you said, give them the money, and they gave you the money, and you looked outside, and there was police. You saw the police pulling up. Yeah, I remember that. Well, then you turn around after they hand you the money, and you shot the teller. Yeah. And the police was standing. You already had the money. Yeah. And their question, we're talking now, thinkers, civilized people, and they're asking the convicted person, what were you thinking? I mean, why did you shoot? She had given you the money. Yeah, I think, I get, best I remember. Well, why did you shoot her? And didn't you turn around, didn't you see the police out there? And he tries and goes, well, yeah, I guess. Well, there was one door out, right? Yeah. And you stood there. She'd already given you the money, so even if you'd gotten away, if the police wasn't there, you had no reason to shoot her. Yeah. But then you tell the police, so if you are going to, you knew you were caught already, then it was just robbery. Now it's murder. What in the hell were you thinking? That's it. It is not that they were not thinking at all. That is, that they were brain dead. The question getting to be what I was trying to get you to see a pretty hardwired way that comes out in normal conversations or out in the public forum such as that, is then the sociologist thinkers, the kind of person that could have got mugged originally, just ordinary civilized thinkers, they ask one another, they debate the question, how can we make these people think about the consequences of their actions? Because that is, in a sense, what it always gets down to, even on large levels, when some tyrant declares war on the world. Once it's over, and he's dead or put away, he's dead, then people go, how in the world did he think he could get by with that? And every sane person, after the fact, every thinking person agrees. It's astounding. No sane person could he didn't even think about the consequences. He's in a bank with one door in, one door out, sees the police pull up, he's already got the money, he's not getting away anyway, and then shot somebody. It's like he didn't think about it, the consequences of his actions. True. That's what I'm trying to get you to see. I'm using their kind of terms. That's accepted. Well, you hear those kind of terms constantly today. To ask the question, a person who thinks. Now, I'd rather make it absolute. Let's talk about the guy that got mugged. And when I started this example, we'll call him someone who thinks more, and the one who mugged him, somebody just jumped out and took all of his stuff, is someone who thinks less. Let's just make it relatively. It's not that the brain's not operating, but this whole idea. The best example is what I've used, the terminology that ordinary people now employ. That is, it's as though these people do not think about the consequences of their action. They do not think of the statistics that show that 98% of every bank robber gets caught. And they will all look at each other like, it's amazing. It's amazing the guy that robs a bank doesn't know that over 98% of all bank robbers, that he doesn't have those statistics, or he hadn't sit there at home and thought, well, let's see. 98 or 97.8% of all bank robbers are caught. And maybe checks other statistics to say, well, let's see about just general muggings on the street, or maybe extortion. Maybe the rate, maybe the chances are better. They think less. This is going somewhere else, as you might suspect, because I am not here giving social commentary. But let me get to his second question. Not only, he says, what were they thinking to do that? Then he points out, well, on top of that, never mind that, on top of that, the episodes drive me crazy. Not only am I hurt now, and my arm will always be twisted slightly, even though I got set from the damage they did me. And not only, I just sold all my belongings and had a cashier's check for it. They stole everything I had. Not only am I still suffering over that, I can always get more money, I guess, and I can live with this. But you know what's really driving me crazy, the person said, is I cannot forget this. I cannot stop thinking about it. It's been months or it's been years. And I think, which is quite predictable, this is a sane, ordinary person. Remember that something not untoward, something not undeserved, something not uncivilized happened to you. And they say, I cannot quit thinking about it. The question being, can you help me? Or, why? Consider this. The two questions are not that far removed, as I'm hoping you're about to see. The one who thinks more, he would be the one normally harmed, the mugger, the muggee. He cannot quit thinking about it. Now, he's already asked, how could the muggers, what were they thinking to do this to me? Asked the muggee. That's one. And then he says, I cannot quit thinking about what they did to me. All right, the second part, he should, if he knew, he would take a lesson from the muggers. Because when they walked away, they forgot about it. Which is part of the problem I didn't want to point it out when I was a few minutes ago too blatantly. It's when they try to question these guys. Like, well, you were staying there in the bank, and didn't you see the police car drive up? It's been months ago, or years ago. But what I'm thinking, it could almost been hours ago. And they have to go, and the reporter or the DA or a cop says, the lights, everybody in there. It was 10 police cars. You were still staying there with a gun on that woman to tell her, and she hadn't even given you the money. We've got all the reports. He's going, well, he doesn't deny it because, and it's not because he thinks, well, have they got me? The truth is he can't remember. He goes, well, he knows he was there and he knew, and he knows now he's in custody. And he goes, there were 10 cars pulled up, all the sirens going. You didn't even hear it? How could you do it? What were you thinking? And he can't answer. And that frightens people because they think, well, it just shows, I mean, the guy, he's unrepentant. It's not really that. The mugger, that is, those who think less, the less civilized, when they perpetrate such acts, when they behave in that manner, they almost walk off and forget it. But think about it. From the view of the one who thought more, the muggee, he says it's unfair. Not only did they take part of my health, deformed my arm, took my wealth, in a sense they took my sanity, or they took my serenity of mind, because I constantly think about that. I can't stop thinking. So he could say, they have stolen from me 3 times. But what he should do is take a lesson if he knew it. One reason they're unrepentant, one reason that they can't give an explanation about, what were you thinking to do that when you'd get caught? The truth is, they were just barely thinking at all. But as far as the third part, he has stole the muggers, the uncivilized, those who think less by their acts of harming me, have stolen from me a third time, which may be the worst part, is I can't quit thinking about it. But see, they walked off, and of course, I know how that sort of thing goes. He can also, without any doubt, probably part of his picture of him keep thinking about it months, years later, is he also thinks about them. Let's say it was them, 2 or 3 of them that jumped him and did all this damage, of them sitting around every now and then, have a beer, and about as often as he thinks about it, they think about it and laugh. And it just makes it worse, him thinking about them laughing when they knocked him down, and he went, oh! And he now pictures they knew for sure that he'd probably broken his arm. They didn't even stop the help. Took all his money, didn't even care. And he can just see him now, sitting around drinking. Well, especially a few hours after it happened. But now, that kind of civilized, regular, thought-driven consciousness of an ordinary person, it can be years later. And he doesn't even question the fact. He just knows that they're still sitting around somewhere. And they, you know how uncivilized thugs are. They sit around and drink. Instead of talking about something decent like the hockey standings, they'll talk about all their nefarious acts they've done. And he just knows his name constantly comes up like, oh, you remember that guy in London? That guy, that real nice guy that we knocked down, I think we broke his arm. They go, ha, ha, ha. They have never thought about him since. They didn't think about him 5 minutes after it was over. Think about that. He can't understand what they were thinking of to operate in such an uncivilized, unintelligent, non-thinking is what he would want to call it. I would call it now non-conscious. How could they do this? What were they thinking? Almost nothing. I answered his first question. Then he says, how can I quit thinking about it? Rather than me just give him some attempted bromide, I would say, well, I just told you, I'd say, take a lesson. If I could make him believe it, let's say I could, instead of me giving him a magic pill like, all right, this will wipe you out worrying about it and thinking about it. Instead of that, here's be the real magic. Let me be able to take his mind and let him see their mind. And I'd say, there's the way you take a lesson from them. Because he'd suddenly realize, after they mugged him and got his money and walked off, 2 minutes later they forgot about him and they have never thought about it since. Never. Now, rather than people out in public and a mugger and a muggee, put all this in your nervous system. Because you got the muggers in the lower part of your nervous system. They're not hiding back, they may be hiding back in an alleyway, they're always hiding somewhere. But if you take the nervous system of man, as per my drawing, the level of consciousness is down here. You've got the muggers, you've got that which thinks less. It's not theoretical, it just thinks less. It's not supposed to think. Your liver doesn't have to stop and think. Your liver does not think, or your stomach does not think. Once this nice piece of rye bread falls down, your stomach does not, and all the juice does, it does not look at that and go, does not consider, am I going to do harm to this piece of food? There is no thought down here. In here, there's a wide range. It's not, as you know, an absolute cutoff line. That's one of the things that psychology and psychiatry loved, was the idea that there is a conscious mind and unconscious mind, which is just a new version of there's good forces and bad forces. And there's a line that that they just state is now part of the common parlance of civilized people. To say, well, it's obvious what's driving him to do such and such is, it's obviously unconscious. Like it just There is no such thing. But in that area, at any particular time, you can be thinking more or thinking less. That is, be driven more by letting the energy that makes man man, that is flowing from the feet right up through the head and continually recycling, you can let where it triggers you. I say let, I'm being facetious somewhat with the King's English here in the waning seconds. It's whether it trips it up higher, that is, whether you're civilized, whether you're the kind of person who would not steal, just to use that example, or mug somebody. Or whether it trips you being a human down here even at a lower level. But it's still, there's an area in there that those who are just barely literate, those who are thieves, those who are the uncivilized on this planet, they're still human. They are human. But they are being driven, they're being triggered by that flow of energy at a lower level. The flood level comes to them sooner. And they're tripped, and they just take it. And they're human. They think, well, I'll rob somebody. And then to worry about, well, what were they thinking when they stood there? Didn't they know that the police were down the street? If you said, didn't you know there's a police station around there, and you really said it, or you took him back and showed him, he'd go, oh yeah, I saw that before, yeah. Well, what were you thinking? You walked around the corner and did that. And you knew the police station was there. What in the hell were you thinking? That's about it. It's in your own nervous system, though. Then look what drives you crazy, whether you look at it this way or not. All your life now, you continue replaying how you've been mugged. Now, we're talking about inside you now. We're not talking about you actually being robbed. We're talking about now, you think that your mind drives you crazy, or you think that there's certain thoughts in you that are unsavory, that are bad, or your interpretation of things that have happened. Now back to the misunderstood. That there's a teaching outside the doctrine, outside the Scripture? Yeah. But do you hear what it is? It's outside of all Scripture. That is, it's outside of all thought. It's outside of it. What does that mean? Well, it means it's some kind of secret thought. No, you're not listening. It's outside that. Whatever it is. Everything that people replay, the songs you continue to sing, even though regardless of the news item when I said that no song can stay forever at the top of the charts. It is true over the long range of the parade, say the parade of man, because that was the Grand Marshal was talking to them. Inside of one lifetime, though, it is like you keep replaying the same thing over and over. Same handful of songs over and over, the same handfuls of complaints, and oftentimes you think it's out there, at somebody that mugged you, perhaps just emotionally or some other way. It's a fish blaming water. Yeah. Which is stupid enough to begin with, but to go on and on and on. Or then assume that you found a mist that had aspirations of being mystical and awakening to some higher scaly level. And you said, all right, but the thing is, you can't go by what you know down here. You know, all the information available, you can be more than just an ordinary carp. But the information that you need, what you need is outside the Scripture. He goes, where? I believe it. Where? There's nowhere. It's outside the Scripture. Once you understand that it's a secret outside, a teaching outside the Scripture, it's a teaching outside of thought. And the mind says, well, yeah, well, which one? Yeah. Why don't we stop there?